Hi, welcome to Second Chance Cinema, featuring the best movies you've never seen. We always take a look at a specific theme, and today's theme will be Holocaust movies. Not World War II Holocaust, but nuclear Holocaust. The two that we've decided to focus on are the 1959 film On the Beach and the 1983 film, which was actually made for TV, called The Day After. Both of these films are unique in that there is absolutely nothing heroic or adventuresome about these films. They are not Mad Max. They are not Planet of the Apes. These are films that take a brutally realistic look, and not even as extreme as it probably would be in real life, as they point out, at what would happen if we had nuclear annihilation. So I thought we would begin with the film On the Beach. But first I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists for this evening. So we have Luisa Pina, who is a local filmmaker here in the Boston area, originally from Venezuela.
Correct.
We have Harry Maguire, who is a University of Pennsylvania student, film student, and also a Harvard Square scriptwriter intern. And Harry has actually written a paper about the subject of Holocaust films of this type, so we're hoping you'll jump right in with your academic perspective on that. And then we have Bob Tremblay, who's been a guest with us many times. Bob is a film critic from the Metro West News and also a journalist. So why don't we begin first by talking about On the Beach, which was actually a film directed by Stanley Kramer. He had to be an independent filmmaker in order to do these types of projects that Hollywood really was not very interested in, including On the Beach, which is not exactly a film that is uplifting. The film was written by John Paxton. It was an adaptation from the Nevil Shute novel, which came out several years before the film was made. Nevil Shute was an Australian author who was, I think, very concerned with the issue of nuclear war in the 1950s, when there was a tremendous nuclear arms race going on across the globe. So I'm just wondering if you guys want to talk a little bit about your reactions having seen this film.
What's interesting about this movie is, if you look at it in context of when it was made, right at the height of the Cold War, and your typical science fiction movie like this, where bad things happen, are usually don't have very good high production values. When you look at the cast of this movie, it's an A cast. Some really talented actors in it, which is very unusual for this genre at the time.
Yeah, so let's talk about the actors just for a moment. We have Anthony Perkins in this movie, kind of a second film for him, playing the Lieutenant Peter Holmes. And then we have Donna Anderson, who plays a young, idealistic wife with a new baby who cannot accept that this might be the end of the world and the end of the life that she imagined for herself. Then we have Ava Gardner, and really quite an extraordinary role for her, as an alcoholic Maura Davidson, who has been drinking her way and sleeping her way through the knowledge the last X number of months that the world is already vastly polluted by radiation. And then comes our Gregory Peck hero, Commander Dwight Towers, an American naval officer who arrives with his submarine to figure out whether this nuclear war is going to annihilate the Australians as it has done most of the rest of the world. So I wonder, you lived in Australia for a number of years,
Yeah.
What your reaction was to seeing a film based in Australia during this time.
What I found more interesting about this film was the relationship between the newlyweds and the baby and accepting the outcome.
I'm glad you're mentioning this because the very first clip that we chose to show illustrates the Anthony Perkins character explaining to his wife that the Australians have come up with a solution to the problem of the radiation sickness, and that is suicide pills. So why don't we all take a quick look at how he explains that to her and her reaction.
Now, this is a special kind of sleeping pill. I had a devil of a time getting them, but I wanted you to have them on hand and to make sure you knew how to use them. What happens with the radiation is that you get ill. You start feeling sick, and then you are sick. And you go on being sick. You can't keep anything down. You may feel better for a while, but it always comes back. You get weaker.
And this cures it.
Darling, you know nothing cures it. This ends it.
Wow.
I couldn't imagine explaining that to your wife and, you know.
And
so
a
hard.
child too.
Yeah.
You know, you have to, hey, give it to the kid. You
A
know.
baby whose life hasn't even started yet. Oh, so tough.
Brutally grim. I mean,
Yeah.
just watch that scene and you go, you
Bleak.
gotta be kidding me. I mean, we should add, by the way, in terms of other stars, Fred Astaire's in this.
Yes.
And it's his first dramatic role.
Yes, Fred Astaire. Here, the original man, tap dance, song and dance guy of Hollywood, chooses to play a scientist in this film. And he has some pretty spectacular lines and observations. And I wondered if one of you wanted to talk a little bit about why do we have sort of a scientist in each of these films, a sort of scientist philosopher.
Well, I think one pretty important purpose is educating the public, just on a very basic level about radiation poisoning. So the purpose of this scientist is to, he has his devices and he gives the crew readings, and they can, it makes it very tangible that it's unsafe out there, and how specifically so.
It's very interesting because when I was researching this film, I found out that the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military refused to assist these filmmakers in any way. But the Australian military was very willing to help. And if you look at the credits in the beginning, they thank the Australian Navy for all their assistance. And in fact, the sub and a lot of the other props in this, or not even props, they're actual machinery, was offered by the Australians. I think on the wings of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because again, the movie, think about it, the movie was made in 1959. It takes place in 1964. We see a calendar that tells us that. So they're just racking forward a few years and imagining the annihilation of the planet, or at least humanity. So I don't know, Harry, I know that you did a lot of research on these kinds of films. How does this one compare with other films of this type?
So I think there's one contrast that is especially powerful in this film, and that is, from the start, we see Australia, which is basically untouched. You see meadows and a culture that is, seems to be flourishing, a lot of bikers. In the beginning, it really hasn't kicked into most of the population that what is coming. That's shown with the Mary Holmes character, who is in denial about what is happening, really.
Well, the theme of denial is huge in it.
Yeah.
Because not only Mary Holmes, the young mother who is probably, it looks to me like in her early 20s, is in a total state of denial, but also when we first meet Dwight, the Gregory Peck character, he is still talking about his family and his wife in present tense. He's saying things like, I'm going to get them a boat to sail when I get back home to Connecticut. And we realize there is no Connecticut. And there's a journey through the film that goes from denial to acceptance. I wanted to mention, bring up the second clip where the submarine has now been challenged with going to California to see if there's any life left there or what the state of things are. And in the second clip, we see the submarine encountering one of their Navy officers who has escaped from the submarine and swum to shore in San Francisco. And do you remember what he does next?
Yeah, so I think he's in he goes into town a bit to, I think he goes to his parents' house. None of this we see, but the next scene is the submarine coming back up and finding this crew member sitting on a boat fishing.
Yeah, I think the whole point is they want to learn, what did he find out? Why is he sitting there fishing and supposedly going to have a beer?
Right.
And so let's take a look at the clip.
Good morning, Swain.
Hi, Captain. I thought you'd gone.
Catch anything?
No, I just started. Always do, though, out here.
How are you feeling?
Okay. My stomach was a bit upset last night, but I got some Alka-Seltzer from the drugstore. I must have swallowed some salt water.
What's it like in town?
Everybody's dead, I guess. My folks are. I didn't look much after I saw a few.
Wow.
The laughs just keep on coming. It's also interesting, you mentioned Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck's wife. I guess the book was even grimmer than the movie. And because I don't think what I guess annoyed the author was the love story between Gardner and Peck, which is not in the book. I think he keeps fidelity with his wife. He just refuses to let that go.
Yes.
I don't think we were going for a happy ending in this movie at all.
I don't think so. How did this happen?
Right.
Was it was it
That's a
them? Was
big
it us?
topic, right?
And the movie, I think, kind of, doesn't really give a concrete answer to that, which I think is pretty good, actually. It doesn't point the finger at either side. People are always wondering about, what if he just pushes the button accidentally, or there's just a miscommunication and then we all die over somebody making a mistake, one of the reasons I think this film is so powerful is that it's what we don't see. I think we only see one person sick in this movie. It's the person that is, on the ship. For the rest of the people, there's no explosions. Everything looks great. What's wrong here? But then, it's what the mind is working on, which will be more powerful than what the eye sees. And that's the other reason why we're going to get into the scene about the Morse code thing.
Well, so let's talk for 1 sec about that. I mean, Harvard Square Scriptwriters, the group that is behind Second Chance Cinema, what we do is we explore story structure. And it seems to me that the driving engine in this movie, not in the other movie, is the idea that, let's find out if there really is going to be a turn of events. They think maybe they'll measure the radiation, right? And it'll be lowering at the Arctic, and it'll be evidence, if you remember that maybe the radiation is not going to reach Australia. And then they also go and they're seeing why are they getting this Morse code signal that makes no sense? They can only get a word once in a while from San Diego. Let's go and find out. And so they travel from Australia to San Diego, and let's take a look, because to me, this is the most profound moment of the whole film. I don't know, did you guys feel that way?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Before we look at the clip, I just want to know.
Well, I think for me, it was because they had so much hope, and they were, I think, if I was in the same boat as they were going, I feel like I'm going to save the world, and then you realize that that's not what's going to happen. You're not going to survive, and that's the future, and there's no hope.
So they're pursuing this through half the film, if you look at the length, more than half of the film, who's sending that code. So let's take a look at that clip. Thank you.
Amazing equipment to last like that.
Wind. Window shade tugging on a Coke bottle.
All right, so there we see three of the major characters all lined up around the periscope being their sort of POV into the world, because they mostly spend their time underwater, and all hope is dashed in that moment. All right, it's that time we love where we rate the movie in terms of whether we think people should watch it or not and why. So I'm going to start with you, Louisa, and we're talking about On the Beach. Tough movie, a very slow pace for current cinema watchers, I think. But what do you think in terms of 1 through 5, with 5 being the highest and 1 the lowest?
I'm gonna give it a 3 because I think they should have worked more in the Australian accents. But the rest of, I think for the time that it was made, it definitely brought a conversation to the table that it was not talked before, that it was the nuclear Holocaust. So I think it is worth for the people who are into nuclear Holocaust movies. They should definitely watch it.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely important film in terms of educating the public in a scenario where a lot of the world is impacted by the radiation. I think a lot of people, especially in my generation, know really nothing about how far radiation can travel, and it would likely reach the whole world. And I think in terms of that, the film's maybe a 4 in terms of you should really watch it and kind of get a sense of this.
So I think I would also give it a 4, and I'll tell you some of the reasons why. I think it's a beautiful film. It's black and white, which I don't think we mentioned, and yet somehow it captures the gorgeous landscape of Australia and also the sense of devastating loss that we see when we look at the grainy black and white images of these empty cities. And I give it a 4 because I agree that it doesn't really, this was mentioned by you, Bob, earlier, it does not give us a real accurate picture of the suffering of nuclear war. It's as though it floats in the radiation like a terrible specter that, and then in a time you are dying, but we don't get the sense of that in the film, and in that way it's sort of missing some urgency. Otherwise I would have given it a 5, I think. Very courageous film for its time.
I'd give it a 4 also. I agree with Louisa, the accents are annoying. I don't know why they can't do these things right, or just not have him be an American moving there. It's just annoying. But a small thing, I think a bigger point of the points you're making, and also it is subdued, I think, and I don't, this film would bomb if they showed it today. But for education, I think that is, and also context, I think people should see this, because I think a lot of people, when they think nuclear war, they think, oh, the bomb, the mushroom thing, but they don't even think about the radiation. They just think the people are going to die where the bomb hits. And for a movie to explore that the way it does, congrats.
Well, we haven't pinned this to our political climate, but I'm going to close this off by saying this should be required viewing for Kim Jong-un and our dear president and quite a few other military hawks who seem to be in the business of, my button is bigger, my bomb is bigger, not understanding exactly as you're saying, this is not an isolated mushroom cloud that lands here and that's the end of it for...
No one wins.
No one wins. So we're going to wrap up this half, and we'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll be taking a look at a very different in many ways and very similar in other ways second film, The Day After, that, again, as I mentioned earlier, was made for television in 1983. So we'll be right back. Welcome to the second half of Second Chance Cinema, featuring the theme of nuclear holocaust. The second film of the night that we'll be taking a look at is The Day After, a 1983 made-for-TV film that was actually produced by ABC Movies. But this is not your typical ABC family show. This very long film, I think it goes over about 2 hours in length, had an incredible audience reaction at the time. And I did a little research on this and imagined this kind of audience involvement. 100 million people watched this film when it aired on television from 39 million households. So you can imagine that it had a profound impact on, at the very least, the American public. The film was directed by Nicholas Meyer and written by an author who I guess was primarily a television writer, Edward Hume, who we don't know too much about. The main actor in this, the most famous actor in it, was Jason Robards Jr., who plays Dr. Russell Oakes. Some of the other actors involved: Jo Beth Williams as Nurse Nancy Bauer, John Cullum as Jim Dahlberg, a farmer, John Lithgow, who we think of as, I think, as much comedic as dramatic in his acting chops, plays a scientist, Joe Huxley. And Stephen Guttenberg plays Stephen Klein, a young pre-medical student at the University of Kansas. And this is not Dorothy's Kansas in this film for sure. It is set in Kansas, and the reason for that, evidently, is one of the premises of the film is that when there will be a nuclear war, all of the missile and industrial sites in the United States would be the targets of our enemies. And so the idea is that, oh, we have a missile launching system right outside of Kansas City, and therefore that will be one of the targets that is hit. So without any further ado, I would love to hear some of your reactions about this film, which probably, I'm sure at least you two, certainly would not have seen because of when it was made, and also where you were raised.
Yeah, I actually never heard about the movie until last year. There was, I was watching an episode of The Americans, which is a TV show set on the 80s, and they said there was an episode where they watched the movie and they made a big deal in the family about well, the whole show also talks about Russians, so it's also a little bit, it brings up that subject. So that was the first time that I ever heard about this movie, and then I actually watched it recently. And it's what I know about this movie is that they wanted to be very authentic and realistic, and they try to use not as famous actors. And it's funny because when I watched it, I know everyone. They're all famous to me. Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, I think I found out about this film when I was watching another modern series, Deutschland 83, which depicts the state of Eastern Europe at the height of the Cold War. So Reagan is settling into office, and the escalation is at its peak. And one thing I'll mention now is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists created the Doomsday Clock, which is basically a symbol, a representation of how close we are to a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear war. And at this stage, in the early 1980s, the clock is set at 3 minutes to midnight, which is the closest it's ever been since the early 50s.
Which I believe we were in the past year. We were.
Yes, we're at 2018. We are currently at 2 minutes for reference. Last year we were 2.5 minutes, and now we're at 2 minutes.
Well, we mentioned this just a few minutes ago, the state of the political hysteria that seems to be occurring in various countries in the world.
Well, the Cold War at this time, again, for more context, it was maybe not as hot as it was in 1959, where we were looking for almost just a few years after we found a communist in every corner. but we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were almost on the brink of what people thought was a nuclear war. So for people to see this film, people of a certain age probably realize, well, this could happen. And again, as opposed to on the beach, this time though, where the political thing, the explanation of who started it is, they basically spend the first half of the film, escalating the conflict of how it could happen, starting with a little skirmish, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse.
Well, yes.
And it's something that could happen today.
Right.
And actually, I'm sure people back then really thought it could happen.
Well, the whole premise, ironically, was that it was going to be a fight about Berlin and the Russians taking not only East Germany, but encroaching into West Germany,
Right.
and then everything escalating from there. And, in this film, we meet a lot of these Kansas people, and it's middle America. We were talking about this. I think we're supposed to be thinking farmland. We see pigs, we see cows being milked, we see this wonderful, visage of the heartland of America, and then all of a sudden we see what the first clip that we're about to watch right now, which is in such dramatic contrast to the way things were handled in the other film, in terms of things have gone berserk. We have launched missiles, the Russians have launched missiles, they have focused on Kansas as one of the targets, and bam, this is what we see. Wow.
Even though some stock footage is obviously used in that, I mean, there's still stuff that wasn't. And I guarantee you, watching that now, it still freaks you out, even though it's kind of, special effects are a little dated, but it still packs a wallet. Even for today's audience, I still think would be freaked out by that. And I guarantee you people that lived through Hiroshima would say that a lot of that's not too far removed from what actually happened. And when people had to watch that, they just had to freak them out. And just no two ways about it. That freaked me out.
Twice in this movie, speaking of Hiroshima, a scientist makes the observation that Hiroshima was peanuts compared with the devastation that could happen today, which we know to be true. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the incredible graphic depiction of illness and death in this. Are there certain scenes that stand out for you as being really poignant as compared with On the Beach?
One of the reasons that I kind of liked On the Beach more than this film is that On the Beach is a little more subtle in its portrayal of what could happen, and here it just spells it out. I'm amazed this actually made it on TV, to be honest with you. I mean, you got bodies just getting disintegrated. I mean, it's absolutely brutal. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that on mainstream TV for mainstream audiences.
Yeah, I was thinking that these two films really complement each other really well, because On the Beach introduces the notion that the radiation can spread everywhere. It's already assumed that most of the world is actually destroyed, like it is in The Day After. But The Day After brings this to life and shows you exactly what does happen in multiple stages on the sites that were hit specifically, and after in surrounding areas.
So some of the things I think are interesting are that, again, this is an ensemble cast, and we see everything from a hematologist, the character played by Jason Robards, to John Cullum's character, Dahlberg, I think is the name, who has a shelter under his house with all the canned goods and everything in it, to someone who just wants to hitchhike home. The Steve Klein student, I just want to get home, you know, he's on the highway. You know, the full range of responses to this type of thing. And I think you're right about the incredibly gruesome depictions, and we also have that theme of denial again. So I thought in our second clip, we could look at Denise Dahlberg. This is the daughter of the farmer. They've now been 5 days in their bunker, and they're going crazy. And she can't stand it anymore, and she misses her fiancé, who was clearly killed. And she decides she's going to escape the bunker and come up into the air of the day. And the young student, Stephen Klein, who has taken refuge with them, promises the parents, I'll chase her and I'll bring her back down to the bunker. So let's take a look at what happens in that scene.
It's a beautiful day!
No, it only looks that way. Hey, hey, you can't see it. You can't feel it. And you can't taste it. But it's here, right now, all around us. It's going through you like an X-ray.
Whoa.
Talking about denial, yeah, just a beautiful day in the middle of a winter, nuclear winter, yeah.
In case you just didn't quite get it, you have all the dead animals in the field too, and the question was the dead dog. I mean, they didn't show that scene there, but when she gets out, there's a dead dog in the kitchen. My major issue is that there are so many characters in this that it dilutes the drama of the film, and I thought that the movie would have been a lot better off if it just focused on 2 or 3 as opposed to 4 to 6, because you get diminishing returns. Like for the Amy Madigan character, for example, very, very powerful. She's about to give birth to a child who is never going to see the light of day. I mean, that is unbelievably tragic, and that's the kind of thing that
yeah,
is not as
that
graphic.
scene is very gruesome, I think, because she's delivering, and everyone instead, when you're delivering a baby, people are usually celebrating new life, and everyone's just so quiet, just listening to her give birth, and that's it. There's no happiness, there's no hope, that new life that it's coming, there's no really there.
It's one of the most powerful scenes in the film, and it could have. It's a lot more subtle than just watching people get it, turn into skeletons.
Yeah.
Right. So on the next clip I thought we could look at, in contrast with what we just saw, was Stephen has volunteered to take Denise, who we just saw running around hysterically, to a hospital, University of Kansas Hospital, and also to take the son, who we saw actually, his retinas were burned by staring at the nuclear explosion. To take both of those children in a horse-drawn buggy, because another thing in this film that was crazy is...
that's one of the best scenes, when all the electricity goes, all the cars just goes.
Oh, come on, baby, don't die on me now. Oh.
I mean, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and they have this explanation about electromagnetic pulses being disturbed. I don't know how scientifically accurate that is, by the nuclear explosions. And so, yeah, all the cars are, so they get in this horse and buggy, he's taken them to the hospital, and guess what? There she is now in the ward with so many other people, and Stephen goes to visit her to see how she's doing and maybe take her back home to the bunker, and this is what we see.
They give me this ribbon to wear. But I haven't got any damn hair to put it into.
You look great.
Pretty brutal.
Yeah.
That pan shot's not quite as powerful, but similar to the Gone with the Wind pan shot, where all the soldiers are dying on the railroad tracks, and you get to see the tattered Confederate flag, waving in the wind. But you have all those people that are on that, they're even worse shape because they are all going to die. It's brutal. I mean, and the makeup, and look at these people. I mean, as opposed to on the beach where the guy looks a little sick, he's a little fever, but his hair is falling out, his teeth aren't all gone. I mean,
Right.
Those are basic walking cadavers.
Yeah. Which
so.
we see a lot of. Other thoughts?
Well, one of the harshest scenes in the movie is the farmer. I mean, he survived this Holocaust.
Jim Dahlberg.
And he gets out and he sees these squatters in his property and he gets killed.
Yeah.
I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, this movie is, brutal. I mean, I'm surprised they did. Is it a spoiler to say that the fact that Jason Robards, that's something horrible was going to happen to him, but I guess he's Jason Robards. So, I did like the fact that they did not cast too many big name stars in this. And I think one of the good thing about that is you never know who's going to survive or who's not going to survive, which is good for an audience because usually main stars are not going to kill them off,
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things about both of these movies are that, the first one was made in late 50s, the other one in early 80s, and now we're 2018, and we are still having the same conversation, and we're still just as unprepared to take on something like this. If something like this were to happen, we're still as unprepared as in the 50s and in the 80s. Yeah, it's a wake-up call. Hey? Yeah, it's a depressing thought, but it's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
Are we going to do the ratings, the 1 to 5?
Absolutely. So take it away. Let's discuss.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a 4 because it kept me more entertained with the gore and the whole things than the other one. But I still like the editing was very chopped, and it was not supposed to. I don't think it was supposed to be a good movie. What the director was intended to. I think it was what he called it. It was more of like a public service. That it was just very long. So I'm going to give it a 4.
I think I'd give it, either a 4 or a 5, just based on the impact it had, which had a very direct impact on, I think, Reagan. After 83 and going up until 91, the doomsday clock rose to about 17 minutes from where it had been at 3. So, there are, of course, other factors, but I think both of these films really influenced public opinion to the point where it was a lot safer. Nuclear war was a lot less likely, and now we've dipped down again to the point of 2 minutes. I think for a lot of reasons, a lot of political reasons, but also because we're shifting towards, there's an extreme popularity in the post-apocalyptic genre where humans survive, and there are heroes, and also the post-apocalyptic video game industry where our younger generations think it could be fun. We could survive. We could beat the bad guys and whatnot. So.
This is very true. I think there is this notion in a lot of the dystopian stuff that we see that in some bizarre way almost glorifies those who will survive after the nuclear disasters. I also would give this film a 5 because I think it completely broke new ground. And even if it isn't the best directed or even acted, although I think the acting improves actually as the film goes along, it's interesting. Especially Jason Robards' performance gets better and better. But it had such a profound effect, and I feel like we should, how they used to run The Wizard of Oz every year, I think at Thanksgiving or something. They should run this film every year on maybe the 4th of July, and instead of aggrandizing, notions of revenge or we're stronger than everyone else, reinforcing the idea that this is the cost of escalating the us versus them, and a military solution to everything has a tremendous cost. And take it away, so I give it a 5.
From a contextual viewpoint and for its influence, I'd probably give it a 5. From a cinematic or movie-making context, I'd probably give it a 3 for the reasons I cited. I mean, the drama gets hurt by all these different strands. People leave for long periods of time and then come back, and we're wondering where did they go. The editing could use some work. But I agree that one of the reasons I think that people probably should see this movie, because I think most people that see these types of movies now, there's almost always a winner. Look at the Mad Max films. It's a classic example of watch Mel Gibson beat on, and he's well, there's hardly anybody alive and we're likely to get any fuel or water, but Mel's going to pull through. And this movie shows that there are no winners. And I think that goes against a lot of people are in denial right now. I'm sure people they're really positive that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un are really reliable, they're not going to do anything stupid because they're both sane people. And
who knows?
I think there'd be a reason to be a little concerned about that right now.
Right.
So,
yeah, we're not going to be wandering around in cat suits like Charlize Theron, right? In the post-apocalyptic world.
I don't think so.
Thanks so much for joining us today for Second Chance Cinema, examining the theme of nuclear Holocaust films. We hope you'll come back again. Take care.